What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Emily and I will be your captain today for another tutorial on the Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. If you guys haven't checked out my basic overview and tutorial that I already did, please go check it out in the description box below. So for today's flight, we're going to be doing a short IFR flight from Vancouver to Victoria in British Columbia, Canada. During the cruise portion, I will be going over all the details of the G1000. We'll be taking a look at an in-depth tutorial. Keep in mind, the actual manual has about 600 pages or so, if I remember correctly. So we're gonna crunch it down and make it kind of usable for you guys so you can use it on your next flight. Also, as a heads up, I got asked a lot of questions in terms of my gaming rig, in terms of like my setup and everything. Please go ahead and check it out in the description. I also have a link to my Patreon as well as some discounts. So please go ahead and check that out. And then if you can't find something, feel free to ask some questions below. But let's get started. One of the first things that I wanted to demonstrate to you guys is just the function in the planning portion before you actually get started in onto your flight. It's actually going to make a difference or make it easier for you in terms of the flight management system, so the FMS or the flight plan option. So I have selected the same 172 that we saw last time. I selected my airport departure for Vancouver 26. We're just going to go direct in terms of departure. It makes it a little bit easier for today. Feel free to throw in an actual departure if you like. And then for our arrival, we are going into Victoria International. Arrival, same thing. I'm actually going to throw in as direct. If you wanted to do kind of like a higher level IFR flight, feel free to choose actual arrivals and to follow along. But just for time purposes today, we're just going to go direct. And then the approach we've selected is the ILS 09. Now, to make sure that I actually get those options, you actually want to go into the drop down portion because it automatically comes up as VOR to VOR, if I'm not mistaken, under IFR. If you do want to practice IFR, you have to go ahead and select your low or high altitude airways. For today, since we are going to be so low to the ground, it's going to be our low level airways. And to confirm that everything is set up how I want to, you can actually go ahead and select the nav log and set your appropriate cruise altitude. Realistically, they'd probably put us at 2,000 for something like this in a larger aircraft. But for today, I'm just going to go to 4 because it's probably like a minimum sector altitude for us today. So if that's all set up and you're happy with your flight conditions, then we can go ahead and fly. Please subscribe to the channel and like this video if you want to see more.
Vancouver Tower, Cessna, November, India, November, Juliet, out for ready for IFR departure, runway 26 left. Cessna, November, India, November, Juliet.
Oh, I cut off the clearance, but you do get the full IFR clearance. So I'm gonna set a couple things up before we depart, and then I'm gonna actually go into in more of an in-depth overview for us today. So I actually need to just grab the frequency 108.7. Oh, you guys gave me the trick. So, okay, I've set up I just looked ahead for our localizer frequency and I've just tuned it up. So for today, if you guys want to follow along, the localizer coming into Victoria is 108.7. I've just tuned up, I've just put in a 4,000 feet for our altitude for our climb today. Just sync our heading bug. My flight plan looks like it's already been set up. I'm also going to set just a couple of our speeds. Again, I'll go through this in greater detail once we get airborne. I swear I practiced this before. Okay. And then the other thing I'm gonna do as well is I've already taken a look and noted that the minimums, I don't think it worked the last time that I did this, but we're just gonna set them, it's actually 250 feet, and we'll see if there's a call out. I think it might be a little bit buggy, so we'll just have that set up for now. The other thing I'm going to preset, again, I'll go over all of this for you guys once we get airborne. So the weird thing with the G1000 is the modes for takeoffs are actually, you can't actually select the go around button. The go around is actually near the throttle right here. So it's normally would be indicated as GA for go around mode instead of flight level change on takeoff. And again, I don't know, it's just not in the setup. So it's just one of the small differences that I've noted in the game. So at this point, we've set up everything I kind of needed. I wanted a heading. I've got a heading, flight level change for our departure to climb to 4,000 feet. We've also been cleared for takeoff. So I think I feel okay with that. Just make sure that we don't have any flaps down accidentally. And I guess we will take off. All right, takeoff power is set. Airspeed is alive. And there's my little VR, if you guys can see that, but that's for rotate. And we've got a positive rate.
November Juliet, Alpha contact, Vancouver departure on 126.12. Going to 126.12 Cessna November Juliet Alpha. Vancouver departure Cessna November India November Juliet Alpha is at 700 feet, climbing 4,000 feet. Cessna November India November Juliet Alpha Vancouver departure continue to Canary as planned. Altimeter 29.92.
Okay, here we go. So I've actually, while there was that ATC communication there, I've actually just set the autopilot to on, and turn this down a little bit. So I've set the autopilot to on, so it's just going to be following my heading for now, and then continue with the flight level change, which is why it kind of bobs in up and down a little bit. So for now, because he told us that we can actually head to Camry, we can actually select the nav mode to on. So we're going to start going through our tutorial now once we are en route. Let's take a look at the sunrise. Wow, so cool. Okay, all right, serious business time. All right, so here we're gonna start to intercept our track, which again, because we had actually preloaded it in the flight plan on the menu screen, but when we first started, it automatically populates it into the flight plan on the G1000 or any other FMS, I believe. So it just makes it a little bit easier for you instead of like having to push a crap ton of buttons when you're first ready to go. So let's start talking about the different functions of the G1000 so that you guys can use it and operate it. So you have our two main streams that are your PFD and then your MFD. So your PFD actually stands for your primary flight display, and then the MFD is your multifunction display. Now, between the actual two screens, there is no difference. There's an actual replica of one another. Another thing that's just a little like fun fact here, this display mode or reversionary mode is actually a malfunction backup. So in the event that one of your screens actually failed, because they are the exact same, you can actually just click on your reversionary mode and it would actually just have a sync, or not a sync, it would actually just blend the two screens, all the information into one, so you could use it in the event of an emergency. So let's start taking a look at all the buttons. So we're first going to be focusing on our MFD, or correction, our PFD. So we have our actual soft keys and our buttons on the left and the right, and then we also have a lot of useful information right in front of us. So for whatever reason, it's not even syncing. So a couple things to note, in the top left, going left to right, we have all of our nav frequencies. So we have both nav1 and nav2, and we have our backup as well as our active. So the ones that are on the inside are going to be your active frequencies. Then another thing that we can take a look at is our actual flight plan, a visual display of our flight plan up top. So we have Vancouver to Canary, which is the waypoint that we were cleared direct to. We have our distance to that waypoint, and then we have our bearing too. So it's not a heading, it's a relative bearing from that waypoint. In correction, to that waypoint. And then we also have our COM1 and our COM2. I'm not sure what my autopilot is doing here. And then we also have our COM1 and our COM2, which again are going to be working the same way. So your COM1 and COM2, and then you have your backup and your primary. There we go. So we're just leveling out at 4,000 feet. And now we are inbound to Cameron to our next waypoint.
Maintain present heading and altitude. Expect ILS runway 90 approach via Bronny transition. Cleared to Bronny.
Okay. So we've been cleared to Bronny.
Expect ILS runway 90 approach via Bronny transition. Cleared to Bronny Cessna November Juliet Alpha.
So I'm actually just going to input direct to Bronny as we accelerate here. Sorry, I need to see a little bit better. Thanks to all the people who told me that you could just roll your mouse to select or to move through the different options. And there we go. Oops. There we go. And then you can go press enter and enter to activate. So we're just going to be heading directly to Bronny now. Awesome. Okay, so let's continue with the rest of what I was mentioning. So we talked about the comms, how the standbys are on the outside and then the actives are on the inside. Now, I'll talk about the main screen, and then we're going to go around these screens to actually understand what each button is going to be doing for you. So I'm just going to set the heading. Normally when you press the heading on the inside, it synchronizes, but for whatever reason, it's not doing that right now. So we're just going to do it manually. Okay, so we talked about the flight plan at the top there. Now the next thing that's underneath is actually your current active autopilot modes that are engaged. So anything that's green is going to be the current active, and anything that's in the white or on the outside are going to be your standby or upcoming modes that you've armed. So here we have our GPS. So we know that right now because I've selected nav as my function, or nav as my lateral navigation, and I have the proper CDI, I will talk about that. I have the proper CDI set to GPS. That's what's going to be actually doing our navigation. Then the next function here is your autopilot, letting you know that your autopilot is in fact on. The next thing is your altitude being set for 4,000. Now, if you guys saw on takeoff, I actually had FLC, which stands for flight level change. So in that case, it's kind of like a workaround for not having a go around button. So in this case, normally on takeoff, you'd take off with a go around pitch. So it would give you your best performance in the event of having to have an engine failure. This is more for, again, for having two engine aircraft, or just again, having the most performance after takeoff. In this case, we just selected flight level change, and I set it to a speed that was appropriate for our performance. Again, for the 172, I think it's 74 knots is going to be your best rate of climb. So I put FLC 74, which you would see over here, and then 4,000 as my altitude. Now to change all of those, I will talk about it. It's going to be all of these buttons over here, and your altitude select knob is actually over here. So you can kind of go from left to right as to what you want to set and then what altitude you want to go to. On your left, you have your speed tape. So increasing is going to be going up towards the red tape or the red bar, and then down is going to be going towards your slower speed. On the right, you have your altimeter. Again, it's created, or not created, it's made into another tape function, so it's a bit easier to read. And then on the most right, you actually have your VSI, so your rate of climb or rate of descent instrument. And then depending on the actual rate of climb itself, you'll actually see that little number in the little indicator as well. You have your barometric pressure that's been set in inches. We're just in standard for today. Also here, the little window would also show RNAV step down altitudes, if I remember correctly, if you were doing an RNAV approach. So I think that would be here, or sorry, that would be for a VNAV setup. It's instead. So you would actually see your next cleared altitude that your VNAV has calculated that it's going to be going to. Next, we have our actual attitude indicator. So now instead of having it as our backup, like we were kind of used to in the 6-pack, we have it in a digital format. So we have our flight director, which is the pink bars. So the flight director and the autopilot are two separate things. So the flight director is actually showing you the modes that you've selected, and the autopilot is going to follow the flight director, move the servos accordingly on the control surfaces to actually get the desired outcome that you've told it that you want. So here is kind of your level cruise attitude, and then pitching up or pitching down will show the degrees of pitch. So this is 5 degrees of nose up, and then the same would be nose down. And then on the top, you have your actual bank indication. So again, going kind of 10, 20, 30, 45, and then 60 degrees of bank. Right now we are level. And this little guy that's underneath the little tiny triangle is actually your slip indicator. So your turn and slip, or turn coordinator in this case. And as long as it's kind of fitting underneath the actual triangle portion, you are coordinated in the G1000. So that's your attitude indicator. Next, if we scroll down, we actually see that we have our heading indicator, which is slaved to the compass in this instance. So right now we are showing that we are on a heading of 198, and I can actually move the heading bug, which is the blue one underneath, to either fit it underneath or move it around depending on what mode I have. Right now, because I'm on GPS navigation, or on GPS nav, the moving the heading bug is actually not going to do anything. Whereas if you were on heading mode on the autopilot for the flight director, it would actually follow that heading bug that you've selected. So this is what I've selected, is right here. This is what I'm actually flying. So your heading is 195, if I see correctly, and then what we're actually flying is 198. So I can kind of move my heading bug to match that. The course is going to be the actual track over the ground that you are actually flying. So again, depending on what kind of winds you're dealing with, your heading will be different based on the crowd that you need to maintain to fly overhead of your course. So the heading indicator is pretty straightforward. We do see that we are on a GPS track. Cool. We're switching over to setter.
125.905 for Cessna November Juliet Alpha. Vancouver Center,
So we've switched over.
India November Juliet Alpha 4,000 feet. Cessna November India November Juliet Alpha Vancouver Center.
Just wait till we're done talking.
Altimeter 29.902.
Beauty. Okay, so decimal 2992 is our current setting, which we have already here, and I talked about it. Your true airspeed is actually your corrected indicated airspeed, so we can see that we're a little bit faster based on our true airspeed. So now I think I've talked about most of the portions of the inside screen itself. So let's talk about some of the buttons themselves. So one of the cool things about it, again, that they are replicated. So I'm going to talk about what's happening kind of on the left, and then you guys will see that it's going to be exactly the same thing on the right. So here is your volume button itself for the nav, and the same will be on the right for the audio levels. Then, of course, we have the buttons to switch between the actual nav frequencies. So if you guys see, it's switching to 109 to 110, and then the inner smaller knob will be the smaller number. Then we have our actual heading bug. You guys saw me kind of playing around with it here. It's really important to try to keep it in sync with what you're actually flying, so that in the event that for whatever reason you lost your GPS, you would be able to revert to a more basic mode of navigation, which would just be, or basic mode of autopilot flying, sorry, and you could just fly with your heading. So you could always try to keep in mind to sync it. Next, let's talk about some of the actual flight director modes that we have. So autopilot on and off is to engage and disengage your autopilot. You could obviously do that with the button that you've assigned to it as well. Next, we have the flight director on and off. So let's just say you wanted to hand fly it and you wanted to follow the flight director modes that you've told it. That's what's going to be created with the purple or the magenta lines. If you didn't even want to have any of the flight director even showing you what to do, and you just wanted to kind of freely freely fly around, then you could just turn the flight director mode off. Heading is going to be the heading mode, and I can actually show you guys, I can toggle on and off. So there's a bit of a shake because the actual autopilot's figuring out where am I actually going to go once I turn into a heading mode. If I reselect it to nav, we see that the GPS is now active. Next one on the left is going to be your approach mode. Now this is going to be important when we do come into Victoria, when we're going to be going into land, because we're going to arm the actual approach itself. So I'll show you guys when we're cleared for the approach. I think it, as a heads up, the flight sim makes you turn inbound when you're not cleared, but we'll simulate like we are. VS, your next one is going to be your vertical speed. So vertical speed is typically used for descents. So when you want to have a rate of descent going down. And to change either both your flight level change or vertical speed with the rate of descent or the actual airspeed, you can do that with the buttons where it says decrease vertical speed or increase vertical speed or increase your airspeed, again, according to which one you've selected. So that's how you would toggle those two. And you guys will see me, I will use that when we start our descent into Victoria, and I'll be using vertical speed mode to descend. Our next one that I talked about, we already talked about the flight director. The next one will be your altitude. So altitude, turning it on or off will either tell the autopilot to hold the altitude that you've selected or not. In this case, because we climbed up in a vertical flight level change, the automation knows that you're actually wanting to level off at the altitude that you've selected in the altitude window. So in this case, if we no longer wanted to hold the altitude, we could just toggle it off. The downside now is we haven't really told it what it's going to do next. So make sure that instead of just toggling that on and off, you've actually told it a new mode. So if you wanted to descend or climb, it would be more prudent to actually go into vertical flight level change, or vertical speed. Oh, I just accidentally did that. Bear with me, guys. I'm still so new at this. There we go. Okay, 4,000. Next one is our VNAV, which would have to be a whole different tutorial for just your VNAV. In this case, because we're actually going to be flying in at 4,000 and we're going to be intercepting our glide slope as per the clearances that we're getting, we don't really need to plan our descent all the way back. VNAV is actually going to be a lot more useful when you're flying at very, very high altitudes and you need to calculate your descent to be at a certain altitude at a certain specific waypoint. So again, if you guys want me to get into VNAV, I can talk about that in a different tutorial. We're not going to be using it here. Back course, probably again, not even use it. I don't even know if there's any back course approaches that even exist. Yeah, we don't even really need to talk about that. Altitude, again, I kind of already talked about it. That's going to be your altitude select window that you're changing here. So it's going to be the altitude that you're telling the autopilot to level on or level off at. Okay, let's talk about some of the buttons on the bottom here. I just want to see how we're doing first. That still looks good. Okay, so on the bottom here, we have our OAT. So we have our current outside air temperature showing 7 degrees, nice at altitude. Your inset is just to toggle on or off the inner map. Again, because we have the big map on our MFD, I typically kind of turn it off. We don't really need it there. The next thing that you're going to probably be wanting to get familiar with, I won't change it just now, because if I change my CDI while I'm actually utilizing it from the GPS, it will toggle it off. Like our navigation is going to go off. So instead, what you could do, you could actually add a different bearing. So in this case, a bearing where it's really just going to be a shadowed arrow to show you what nav instrument has been tuned on that one. So if I were to toggle I'll remove this here back. If I were to toggle my CDI to, we have two other modes. We have VOR1 and VOR2. If I were to toggle my CDI to the first one, it would actually mirror this bearing that I've set up here. But to increase your situational awareness, because you know that we are eventually going to be using that needle for the VOR or for the localizer when we come in for the ILS, we can actually have it as a shadow so we know what we're anticipating. So visually, we can see that we're actually going to be turning left inbound for 09 to Victoria. So I kind of like having that there. The neat feature too is that it actually shows you the ident for the nav frequency that you've tuned in. So in this case, it's actually telling you that it can actually hear and it's in range for the IKH localizer, which is the for the ILS 09 into Victoria. So that's actually good. It's telling us we're en route. It's going to be the proper instrument, and we can actually also see that it will be sensing it based on the fact that we have now a little G, which wasn't there before. It's actually indicating you now it's sensing the glide slopes. That's the little G, and that's that little diamond showing you where you are in relation to your glide slope. It's not, we can't obviously trust it from this far out, but once we turn inbound, you'll see it'll turn green to let us know we're good to go. So these are a couple different modes you can play around with. You can actually set different other needles depending on what you've set up in a backup nav frequency. If you had a DME for measuring the distance, you could actually also toggle that on or off. In the interest of keeping things a little bit simple, I'm just gonna have just the one backup needle that we kind of need for now, but feel free to play around with that. Transponder is to just manually set in the code. If you were to be given a code, you could actually just type it in right here and we would show it in the window. In this situation here, we're on alt, which means it's actually transponding, whereas if it was on standby, it would be more so when we're on the ground once we land. We do also have our local time. We also have the timer and reference. So if you needed to use a timer, if you're doing a localizer approach and you needed to time your misapproach point, you could use a timer for that. You also have your best glide, your rotate speed, your best angle, and your best rate of climb. And those are just the tape indication on the airspeed indicator, whether you want them on or off. Okay, 3,600.
Descend and maintain 3,600 feet Cessna November Juliet Alpha.
Still getting used to this. So 3,600, I'll get back to the timer. So I've set 3,600 and I'm actually going to go to VS and arm the approach here because I don't know if it's going to. There we go. So 3,600, I'm going to start my rate of descent. So I've actually gone to VS 500 feet per minute to 3,600, and that's what it's starting to do. So I had to quickly toggle to my CDI now to go into actually start sensing the localizer, because I don't know if it would have been an overlay with the GPS. So all I did was toggle to the first CDI needle, which was Loc 1. Just gonna slow down a tiny bit here. Localizer 1, which is the frequency that we had preset in our window here. So it actually already has intercepted it because we are right on track, and we see that the glide slope is also alive. We're gonna wait till we're a little bit closer to continue our descent in. We're a little bit far back for now, but ATC's told us to descend to 3,600. So all I did was switch the CDI to Loc 1, and then I went to arm the approach, and that changed the function here, which is now telling, which is now telling the flight director to actually just follow the localizer, no longer your GPS or your nav. In this case, it's going to be localizer 1. So now that we've talked about that, the timer reference, I think I covered it. Nearest is really nice in terms of being able to find some diverting points. So if you wanted to divert due to some rough weather, you can look at your nearest function for that. And then your alerts is whenever there's something that needs to be brought to your attention. Okay.
Descend and maintain 2,300 feet Cessna November Juliet Alpha.
2,300 feet. And again, I'm gonna go to VS, and I'm going to decrease my vertical speed to 500 feet per minute. That's what your FPM stands for. And here, oh, it's actually you're indicating the actual rate that you've selected. So 500 minus 500, and then this is the trending rate instrument. So this one is going to fluctuate. Okay, so we're inbound to our track now. And I'll just finish up with the buttons on the right side here. That looks good. Okay, so the COM audio levels here are going to be for this knob right here. You can toggle the active and the standby frequency by toggling this arrow. This is going to be the toggle between COM 1 and COM 2 to change. This is actually the outer portion is your barometric pressure, and then the Oh, the glide slope actually already came alive. Perfect. So I think we're just following it in now. Kind of captured it perfectly. And then the inner portion will be your course adjustment. Because the G1000 actually tunes it automatically, you don't even need to change the course for your inbound track, which in this case is 089. So you can just leave it as is. If you wanted to do a hold, that's when you would probably change the actual course itself. The range, this is just to zoom in and out or to pan in and out or sideways for the inset map. And then here are your flight plan functions. So your direct to, the menu, the flight plan to visualize, procedures to select different approaches that you're interested in doing. In this case, we already have it preset for the ILS 09. Clear and enter. So again, feel free to play around with these because this would take another full tutorial to actually get familiar. And this is just your navigation button. Okay, let's take a look and see how we're doing. Looks like we're gonna level off, but we might actually continue with the glide slope because it's actually the active mode here. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, it's still descending.
You are 8 miles west of Victoria. Contact tower on 121.9 when inbound. Tower on
Okay, so we're going to contact tower at this point. So we've captured the... Oh, wait till he's done.
Miles west inbound ILS runway 9er approach. Cessna November India November Juliet Alpha Tower. Cleared ILS runway 9er approach. Altimeter 29er to wind 252 entry.
Perfect. So we're actually cleared for the ILS. I have selected it on ahead of time just for the autopilot to function properly, but this is the point where you'd actually be intercepting and cleared for the approach. So we're continuing inbound, and I'll just finish up with the rest of the screens before I try and land this. Oh, we cleared land. All right, turn off our taxi lights. Okay, so here... All right, we're clear to land at 09. So here, this is to toggle to either transmit or to listen to your different comm frequencies. There's also a third comm as a backup that doesn't exist in this aircraft. These are a couple of again, these are to listen to your different nav frequencies, so your DME, nav1, nav2, your ADF, and an auxiliary. Because it auto-idents, you actually don't need to be listening to the frequency. And I'd be curious to see if it actually works in this. And then you can also replay the last transmission. There's a function for the G1000 on that. So these are, not really going to be playing around with these, so don't worry too much about them. So we're inbound to land now. I'm going to soon start to get set up with my flaps. We've just passed the actual mil bay NDB, which is the FAF in this case. So we're going to make sure that we start to slow it down. And I'll just cover a couple more things here on the side as we finalize our approach. RPM, your fuel flow in gallons per hour, your oil pressure, oil temperature, exhaust gas temperature, your vacuum gauge, just putting my flaps in, your fuel quantity on both sides, and your electrical. So your main and essential buses, as well as your volts on your main and your standby battery. Sorry, the volts on the buses and your main and standby battery amps. And that's kind of it, and everything else is kind of replicated. There's a nice aircraft taking off here. So I'll add my second set of flaps here. We'll get ourselves all configured up so that I can land this bad boy. And yes, the 172 is a bad boy. All right, that looks good. Should I try to land it? There you go. All right, autopilot disengage. And at 1,000 feet above, I would have set, I don't know what that aircraft is doing there, but hey, at 1,000 feet above also, I would have set my missed approach altitude. I would have set that in the altitude window. So call it 4,000 here. I haven't actually looked at the plate, so I'm not actually sure what it is, but 4,000 would be absolutely suitable for here. looks like we're a little bit high on the glide slope, so I'm just gonna correct that. I'm concerned for that aircraft that's ahead of us, but let's just pretend there's no plane there. Well, I got distracted there by that aircraft. Okay, there we go. Bring some brakes in.
Cessna November Juliet Alpha turn, next taxiway.
All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that G1000 tutorial along with a little IFR flight from Vancouver to Victoria. I hope you go ahead and try to replicate it as well. Hopefully my tutorial was helpful to you. Let me know if there's something that you would be interested in seeing and even more in depth in terms of the G1000 or a different aircraft. But for now, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.